You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast, episode 9, season number 4, the 2025 Cubs PECOTA projections. They are out, Crawly. Don't forget to listen, download, review. Most importantly, subscribe to the podcast, follow on all the socials, Fly the W670, Twitter, Instagram, and Fly the W on Facebook, or email us, flythew670@gmail.com. All right, Crawly, PECOTA projections are out. The Cubs are due out in spring training, pitchers and catchers, by the 9th. So things are looking to point in a direction of real baseball.
Yeah, well, we are getting close, and it's really exciting right now. I can tell you, Dustin, year round, I need my baseball fix. And so I was tuned in, like always, 670 The Score, for Inside the Clubhouse from 9 to 11. And boy, Bruce Levine was, I think we should start calling them Bruce bombs, right? Remember how there was like Woj bombs?
Woj bombs, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we need Bruce bombs, because I'm sitting there, and what he was saying, I almost spit out my cereal while I was eating it, listening to some of this stuff. It was really interesting. So we have a couple clips, but we definitely got to talk about this right here. And so, Bruce was talking about Jed's offseason, kind of some of the things he was doing. And so here's what he had to say.
Hoyer's been tremendously creative here in getting his 2025 team up to the level of being a championship contender. And he's not done yet. We're talking about Bregman. We're talking about Cease. We're talking about a closer named Robert Suarez with San Diego. These are all things that they're still on the table, still being talked about.
Okay, that one's no shock there, right? We talked about that on the last episode. We're going to steal Jed's favorite line. It looks like he's got a lot of lines in the water, right?
Right.
And so one of them we talked about was Alex Bregman. We know Jed and Astros GM Dana Brown have been talking a whole bunch. Cubs got Kyle Tucker and closer Ryan Presley in different trades with Houston. Cubs signed Caleb Thielbar. And so, when we were listening to the clips from Ryan Presley the other day, and they're asking about Ryan Bregman or Alex Bregman, when we were at CubsCon and they're asking Kyle Tucker about Alex Bregman, it doesn't seem like the rumors have stopped. And in fact, Dustin, it seems like they're almost increasing, doesn't it?
Oh my gosh. It's like any second now, something's about to happen, and the Cubs are always mentioned.
Right. And so this is what Bruce had to say about what an Alex Bregman contract would look like.
Let's talk about what a contract looks like for Alex Bregman. It's not 5 or 6 years.
I don't think the Cubs are signing another 6-year deal at this point in time.
Okay.
So what it might look like is, use your imagination. It can be a 1 to 3, exactly like a Cody Bellinger deal last year. Okay. 1 year, second year is player opt out, third year is player opt out, or mutual options with buyouts, okay? Mm-hmm. Second and third year. Could they be creative? Look, Scott Boras is one of the most creative, powerful agents in the history of the game. Could they come up with a new format for Bregman that gives you 4 option years for both the club and the team? Opt-outs or mutual options, or mutual options with buyouts. Anything is possible right now, I think. But the player getting the money he wants for this year, possibly for the other years, and the flexibility to have an awesome year in 2025 and moving on to another 5-year deal with somebody else for what he considers guaranteed money. These are all things that are probably on the table.
I mean, that to me right now, I'm just kind of sitting there. That was the first time I spit out my cereal right there, because I'm trying to think about, I know Scott Boras is creative, but what Bruce is talking about, I've never heard of something like that, like a 4-year deal with opt-outs after every single year. I mean,
well, it's kind of Bellinger-esque, right? I mean, similar.
Kind of. I don't know. I mean, some of the things you're talking about,
he had a 1-year guarantee and then 2 years his option, correct? Wasn't that the structure of his?
That was the structure.
So we're talking about adding one more, right? That's what they're talking about here.
That usually is a lot. And then the other thing he talked about were mutual opt-outs after every year, which is not something you usually see at all, especially.
That's unusual, right? That's unusual.
Especially with the player of Bregman's caliber. So I don't want to be one to dismiss Scott Boras, but I'm just kind of looking the last few years. Do you kind of feel like some of the varnish has been kind of taken off there?
I think he has good years and bad years, and good years and it's like ebbs and flows back and forth. Yeah, I mean he's not he's not a 2-foot putt all the time anymore. No.
I'm just looking at last year and kind of the Boras 4 or 5, however you want to count him last year. I'm looking at right now, seeing what's going on with Pete Alonso. As far as the Astros are concerned, they offered him 6 years, $156 million, Dustin. And, I'm just kind of very surprised knowing obviously Bregman's teammates talked about him. Altuve said he'd move to whatever position, but that's a pretty good, I think, fair offer by the Astros. And
really fair. The
Astros don't seem inclined to offer any more than that. And there's concern. I mean, Mark Feinsand pointed out that Bregman had an abrupt drop off in his walk rate this year, coming in at 6.9% after posting a walk rate of at least 11% in each of his 6 seasons, 2018 to 2023. So Dustin, his walk rate dropped almost in half. All right. It says a reliable on base throughout his career, 373 OBP from 2016 to 23. This year, 315. So his OBP dropped about 60 points in 2024. His lowest since 2016 when he debuted. His chase rate was 23.6, highest since 2017. And his 44.9% swing rate was the highest since 2016. Dustin, all of these things, the drop in walk rate, on base percentage, his whiff rate. I mean, all these things are not looking good. And so,
maybe that's why teams are trying to, go with these 1 year prove it deals.
Yeah, I'm just saying, giving up a 6 year, giving up a 6 year.
I would never. Yeah, I mean that's listen, he's on himself, and at this point, it looks like he's going to swing and miss, right? Pun intended, right? At this exact moment. So
the
agree
other
or disagree?
I agree, but the other question is, what about Matt Shaw? Right? We heard all offseason, especially at CubsCon, that Shaw's going to be given
a lot of pressure, Crawly.
Right, but that he's going to be given every opportunity to take that job. So let's say you do sign Bregman. Does Shaw then go to second? And then what happens to Nico? Or do you keep Shaw in the minors at AAA until maybe the All-Star break and then try to trade Nico then? I mean, if you're going to do that, that's going to be a question. And Dustin, over the weekend, the Cubs signed Naperville Nicky Lopez, who used to play second base for the Southsiders. So the Cubs have.
Let me get this right. Nicky Lopez is better than Miles Mastroboni. Is that what we're led to believe?
I'm trying to figure it out because the Cubs have a glut of infielders. They got John Birdie. They got Vidal Brujan. They got Ben.
That's my thing. And Brujan, like, why did they bother to get Brujan? And now you're going to get Nicky Lopez. Now, Nicky Lopez signed a minor league deal, right? So he has no guarantees other than that he's invited to camp. That's the guarantee, right?
Right. He's got a minor league deal and he's invited to major league camp. It's just, my question is are the Cubs maybe preparing to make some moves? The Nicky Lopez thing doesn't make sense. If you remember in 2016 in the off season, everyone was shocked when they traded Starlin Castro, but then they turned around and used that money from that to get Ben Zobrist.
Right.
Okay. Right. And so my question here is, just with the timing, with all the Bregman stuff, maybe I'm trying to read into the tea leaves too much, but that one to me was kind of just like, why would you need Nicky Lopez? I mean, okay, depth in the minor leagues, I guess, but
I mean, it's protection. You're protecting yourself, right? You're protecting yourself at second, short, and third. What's scary to me is short, Dansby Swanson, right? We found out that he had to have that core surgery, right? And he was playing through that last year. Now, does this send up a flare that maybe he's not recovering as quickly as they had hoped?
I'm not worried about it.
Do you read into that or no?
No, I'm more worried about Nico's recovery than I am about Dansby's, to be honest.
Right. I'm just saying maybe it's all of it.
But it just seems like a lot of guys that kind of have the same skill set. And don't forget, you got James Triantos, who's a top 100 prospect, also at AAA. And so I don't know what they're doing. It's interesting. Now, on the last episode, we talked about all the smoke between the Cubs and Padres, but word came out on Friday that San Diego extended starter Michael King. We'll get more to that in segment 3. But that leaves 2 guys that are definitely on the Cubs' radar, Dylan Cease and reliever Robert Suarez. We know about that wasn't new, that Bruce brought that up, the Cease and the Suarez thing. That's not new.
Right.
But it's what he had to say about what could possibly be an exchange for Cease that got Cub fans in a dander.
For the moon, and they're asking for Matt Shaw. That's not abnormal. A team should ask for the best possible players. Matt Shaw is not going in a deal for a 1-year rental of Dylan Cease. And if that's the price, it won't be here. It won't.
So the more realistic deal is Justin Steele for Dylan Cease. Why is that more realistic for San Diego? Okay. San Diego Dylan Cease is one of the top 5 pitchers, 6 pitchers in baseball right now. Innings, strikeouts, durability, all prove that is the case. Steele has 2 years left on a contract. This year he's making $6.6 million. Cease is making $14 million. San Diego is right in the middle of a crisis money-wise, where they're having trouble coming up with money. The ownership is fighting. Is there infighting going on in ownership to see who ends up controlling that team? So A.J. Preller, the president of baseball operations, general manager there, needs to stealthily try to win a World Series and at the same time dump money. Okay. And with this, he would save somewhere around $7.5 million in a trade like Cease for Steele. Why would you trade Steele with 2 years left and Cease only 1 year left? And you're trying to win a World Series in 2025.
Yeah, and look, you're at some point you got to.
Wow, boom. There it is. There's the Bruce bomb, right?
Why can't we as Cub fans, or why can't the Cubs have both? Why can't they have Dylan Cease and Justin Steele in a rotation? Why couldn't you have had Tucker and Bellinger in a lineup, right? And this is what I don't understand. So it's like you do one good thing, but then you got to take something good away in order to. You can't have 2 good things. You can only have one good thing at a time if you're the Cubs, apparently.
Well, you know that they're looking at that luxury tax, and they're using that as a cap, basically. And so we heard the names like Matt Shaw, which, Ryan McGuffey said, yeah, that's not going to happen, but you're going to ask anyway, right? But the names that we heard more often, Dustin, was Owen Casey, Kevin Alcantara, Javier Assad, those type of things. But Justin Steele, the pride of Lucedale, Mississippi, boy. So, I mean, the guys did a great job talking about, kind of why you would do it. Would you like to, yes, have both of them on a roster? Of course. But again, where are you going to put, obviously you have a lot of guys that are already on the rotation. And so this could be something. If you're going to give up Justin Steele, then you aren't really going to give up too many prospects, right? You're not going to then have to give up an Owen Casey. You're not going to have to give up, I don't know exactly who they would want on that. And so the big question is Jed Hoyer going all in his last year, because Cease is set to become a free agent after 2025.
Right.
But at the same time, Steele's in the same boat after 2026. And have you really heard anything about the Cubs engaging in extension talks with Steele?
No, I know we've all thought, hey, are they going to? But I've not heard anything that they are. No.
So at this point in time, you got to ask yourself, if you have a chance, okay, you don't know what's going to happen with Kyle Tucker next year, and you've put all your eggs in that basket, right? So if you're going to do that, why not go all in on that? But you'd have to give up Justin Steele. But when you look at the numbers, okay.
Oh, yeah. They're way lopsided in Dylan Cease's favor. Way lopsided. Well, what would you do, Crawly? What would you do? I mean, that's the question. I mean, the question is, what would you do? What would I do? What will Jed do?
So when you look at the type of situation here, when you see Cease, he is first in MLB in starts. In MLB, 3rd in strikeouts, 7 in wins, 9th in innings, 12th in ERA. He averages 10 plus strikeouts a game. And so that's been since 2020, his first full season, and that's a weird season to begin with. So what I did, Dustin, is I went back and I said, okay, Justin Steele has become a full-time starter in 2022. So I looked at those years, the 22 through the 24 seasons, and looked at some of those same categories. Cease's third in games started with 98, and Steele's 34th with 78. Cease's first in strikeouts was 665. Steele's 31st, 437. Don't worry about wins that much, but I looked at quality starts. Cease was 9th in quality starts with 44. Justin Steele's right behind him with, he's in 13th with 39, so about 5 difference there. And he has more innings pitched. But Dustin, when you're asking me about this one right here, the Cubs don't have a flamethrower. That's been a problem we've talked about both in the rotation and in the bullpen. Do you know the average fastball in the Cubs rotation?
90?
92 miles per hour. Dylan Cease's average fastball is 96.9, which is 2 degrees more than MLB average for right-handers.
All right.
And so when we look at these guys, and the one thing we looked at was lefty, 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 lefty. You basically, other than Jameson Taillon, you have like an all lefty rotation. If you were to trade Justin Steele, and I'm not saying I want to right yet, I'm trying to just kind of justify it in my own head. You get a guy that A, makes every single start, throws a lot of innings, a lot of quality starts, and throws with gas. He gets strikeouts. He misses bats. And to me, it's a different look in the rotation than what you have. And so I kind of see it as a change of pace. It might be something that might be worthwhile. Like I said, if this is though the danger when you have a guy like Jed Hoyer going into his walk here, is that for him, it's playoffs or he's fired. That's it. If the Cubs don't make it to the postseason, there is no question that Jed Hoyer does not have a job in Chicago next year. And so is he doing, he'll say, well, I don't worry about that stuff. I'll just do what's best for the team, yada, yada, yada. You can't tell me that that's not somewhere in the back of your mind that
it's only human. It's only human for it to be in the back of his mind.
100%. And so at this point in time, you don't know for me, I've always wondered why the Cubs didn't sign Justin Steele, especially this offseason when he kind of was off for a year, you know what I mean, with the injury and stuff. This was a time to get him as low as you could possibly get him. And then if he has a good year this year and next year, well, then he's going to be one of those pitchers that's going to be extremely expensive when he hits free agency. So if you didn't do it now, you might as well then just say, hey, you know what? What's 1 year, right? What's 1 year? It doesn't really matter. Go ahead and get Dylan Cease and go for it now while you have Kyle Tucker for sure on this team. And so I can very much see Jed Hoyer being very tempted to do it. And then if they can kind of throw in some of those prospects that we talked about Kevin Alcantara or, James Triantos or Javier Assad, and then get a solid reliever like Robert Suarez to really solidify that back end of the bullpen. Now you're talking about Presley, Suarez 8th. Now you're going Porter Hodge 7th. You're making that bullpen
pretty damn good. That's pretty damn good, right? Yeah.
Extremely deep. And so there you go. You have a bona fide ace starter in Dylan Cease. You have a rotation now that's more balanced with a little bit more heat, more balanced righty-lefty. And so you're going for it this year. And when we talk to Greg Goldstein in this next segment, the Cubs are right up there with 90 wins and have a good probability. Again, they have to get through the Dodgers, but have a good probability to make it deep in the postseason. So if you're going to go all in, why not do it now? I can see the move being made. I can see why Jed would be tempted. And it may be something that we as Cub fans might say, this may be the time to go for it all, put all your chips in. So I don't think giving up Kevin Alcantara and Javier Assad, and 1 year of Justin Steele is going all in and completely then wiping you out. I don't think that you're not going to be completely barren the next season. So part of me is saying it might be the move to go for it this season right now.
Tough call, Crawly. Tough call. This is the Fly the W670 podcast. It is episode 9. It is season number 4. The 2025 Cubs PECOTA projections are out. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. Leave us a 5-star review. You can email us at flythew670@gmail.com. Don't forget you can watch us on the Score YouTube page. It's that time of year again. The PECOTA machine has spit out its projections and the Cubs winning 90 games. In this segment, Crawly talks to Craig Goldstein of Baseball Prospectus on why PECOTA has the Cubs winning so many games and things to keep in mind when looking at these projections.
I am happy to have on the most important man in baseball right now, Craig Goldstein from Baseball Perspective. Craig, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Good. I see you got your Capley, your new annual of Baseball Prospectus right behind you, right?
Yeah, that's right. New book just came out. It's shipping now, so people are getting it right as the calendar turns to February. Everyone starts paying a little bit more attention to baseball. We got projected standings in there. We got projections in there, all sorts of information for everybody on every single team. So
for people that have not, this is, I think, your third year on here, Craig. And so people that are not aware and they're watching live is that you are not the bad guy here. You aren't the one that are making the projections. You are just the one that inputs the data into the machine and the machine spits it out. You are not default. So nobody blame Craig for the projections.
I'm of two minds on this. I'm absolutely not the person to blame. You should absolutely like me, appreciate me. It's not my fault. Also, if you want to yell at someone, it's okay. No, this is the beauty of projections, right? There's a model. It outputs a set of numbers, and it's the model's fault. It can never be my fault, right? I'm not even the keeper of the model, but that's not important either. If people need someone to yell at, I'll be your clown. That's fine. You can throw tomatoes at me. That's also fine. But no, technically, I don't have anything to actually do with how the projections come out.
So do me a favor. Tell us how these projections work. How do these numbers come about?
Sure. So, every site's version of this is going to be different, right? So I don't want to say there are going to be some similarities to how they all work. But we have specific metrics at Baseball Prospectus that other sites don't have. Other sites have metrics that we don't have. An example of this would be we have similar metrics to let's say Fangraphs, right? Fangraphs has a variety of projections. They use Steamer. They use their own depth charts projections. They have a variety of ones. They just introduced one from Jordan Rosenblum called Oopsie. These all have a variety of inputs that other ones either do or don't have or use in different ways. Fangraphs uses a metric called WRC+, which some of these projection systems spit out as an end point, right? They project a certain WRC+, but what goes into it is also a player's prior production or prior history of WRC+. At Baseball Prospectus, we use DRC+, deserves that. Theirs is weighted runs created, ours is deserved runs created. They're slightly different metrics. They're trying to answer different questions, and so inevitably we're going to see some differences there in the projections based on those type of things, but there is generally a kind of broad alignment of these things. So what goes into a projection? As I said, the past history of a player is the biggest thing, right? We take what someone has done, both the year prior, but also several years prior, and they're kind of discounted. The most recent season matters the most, but how long your track record is and how stable it is also a crucial component of that. And one of the things that projection systems do really well that we as people struggle with is they remember the past a little bit better than we do. We're much more biased towards what's happened recently. And so in those ways, they can be really good at certain aspects of anticipating what's going to come in terms of whether someone's going to return to form or whether a breakout is real or something like that we might not. On the flip side, there are things people do know that we don't, that a projection system will not. If someone makes a swing change mid-season, right, a projection system only has the data to account for that, but not the reason that it happened. And so it's not going to know how sustainable that is versus a pure hot streak from someone else who didn't make an actual change to their swing. So there are benefits and detriments to both, to both sides of that.
Well, let me ask you, a guy like PCA, we saw Pete Crow Armstrong, center fielder. He came up for a cup of coffee in 2023, so hard to really put numbers on that. And then he comes out in 2024 and he gets a lot more playing time. And in the second half, it clicks for him. How hard is it for the data model to analyze somebody that doesn't have that many at bats like a PCA and trying to project what he's going to do in 2025?
Yeah, I think it's complicated, right? And I think those guys pose some of the biggest tests of any sort of projection system. I think you'll note ours is actually pretty positive. I was going to say this is the third time I've done this. I think the last two, not from you, but it's been like, a little bit got to put on my armor before walking in here because the projections for the Cubs weren't as positive as I think some people were anticipating. This year, it's a little bit better, right? We project them to be at the top of the division. Pete Crow Armstrong, we have a 93 DRC plus. And what that means is he's 7% worse than league average. So that's not incredibly positive. But what I want to note is what we have from his last season, the inputs, right, to that projection. Our last season, even with his really good second half, he was at an 87 DRC plus. So it's still projecting him to be better than he was last year on balance. So there's some growth factored into that, which is what you see in some of that second half performance. He's a tricky one too, though, because even that second half performance, there was some dip towards the end there as well. So I think everyone's kind of wondering, I think no matter how you look at it, is how sustainable is that kind of second half performance. But the reality is with him, even if he's a league average bat, if he's within 5 points of league average, that's a really valuable player. And our metrics show that. We're saying 93 DRC plus, that's worse than average on offense, 2.5 wins overall is the projection for him, which tells you how good his defense is.
That's what we know about PCA. So Craig, I'm going to do this. And in some ways you're going to say, hey, the projections were right. And others you're going to be like, we were off on that. This was what you guys projected for the 2024 season. You had St. Louis in first place with 84 wins. You had the Cubs at 81 wins. They finished with 83. You had Milwaukee at 79 wins, Cincinnati at 77, and Pittsburgh at 72. Now, Craig, no one can blame you because I was just as guilty as thinking. I had it a little bit different in my head. I had the Reds in first place, the Cubs at second, and I had the Brewers in third. So I didn't think that the Brewers were going to do what they did, which is 93 wins. The Cardinals and Cubs tied with 83. And so the projections weren't far off on the Cardinals and Cubs. And this is what kind of blows our mind here. It used to be the Cardinals used to do this all the time. The Cardinals will come out of nowhere and get these guys, and who the hell are they? And the next thing you know, the Cardinals would win the division and try to be making a run for the World Series. But it seems like Milwaukee has taken some of that mojo from St. Louis, and somehow they keep defying predictions and projections and anything else. I'm sitting there laughing. Okay, you got no more Josh Hader. Okay, you got no more Craig Counsell, this, that, and the other. And somehow they still manage to win the division. How do they keep doing this? And how come it's hard for PECOTA to predict Milwaukee?
Yeah, I don't think any team necessarily has a long-term secret sauce on this, right? I mean, to your point, the Cardinals were doing it for years. The Orioles before them, right? The Orioles with their great bullpen was a big part of it. And I do think bullpens are a persistent weakness in this, right? There's so few innings that each of these individuals throws. We're talking 50 to 60 innings generally. Cleveland can fall into the same bucket with how good their relievers are. But a few bad innings or a string of really good outings from a reliever can change what's on record, what goes on the books, right? If you win the game, it's a full win. But the way projection systems work, that's not how they technically operate on a player projection level, right? So if you give up 15 runs in one outing, it only counts as one loss. But for a projection system, it takes that full performance into account and has to say, like, well, if you're capable of giving up 15 runs in one outing as a pitcher, we have to spread that out in terms of performance over a number of, over a season, over a number of games. So it's dealing with certain things like that. I do think again, Milwaukee is known for having a great bullpen, and they do it on the fly with a lot of guys. Their pitching development is really, really good, right? They have these guys that are kind of come out of nowhere every year and manage to take steps forward. Whether it's again, you mentioned no Josh Hader. They didn't have Devin Williams for most of the year. We've seen a number of guys in their bullpen come out of nowhere, whether it's Elvis Peguero or well, I'm blanking on some of the other names. Aaron Ashby came out and was really good, not last year, but the year before in relief for them. They pull these guys either out of their system or off waivers, give them a new pitch or a new approach, a new mix to throw, and all of a sudden they're a much better performer. And again, if you add a pitch that meaningfully changes what you can do, and we saw this, for example, in Houston with Hunter Brown, right? He added a sinker, which wasn't even that good a sinker, a two-seamer. But it opened up all of his other pitches and made batters have to account for that movement profile and something like that. If you do that mid-season, it meaningfully changes what the player can do and what it means for the team, but the projection system isn't going to catch on to that. So if they're doing a lot of those things, it can miss on that. I also want to point out that they played a lot of young guys. And for example, Jackson Chourio, jumping straight from AA, essentially, barely any time in AAA, 20 years old, hadn't really dominated in the minors, even though what he was doing for his age was incredible. Struggles the first month, 6 weeks, and then takes off. And look, they have insight into that. They know what his ability to handle adversity is. They've challenged him aggressively throughout his entire career, but the projection system is working off numbers, right? They can't see inside a guy's heart. They can't see his mentality. It can't see anything like that. So a projection system is going off numbers that were good for his age, but not dominant. And then saying, okay, you throw him in the majors right now and give him a ton of playing time. We're not going to project him necessarily really, really well. But of course he was, come June, he was one of the best players in baseball from that point forward. So they got a lot of performances like that. And look, if you want me to be honest, I look at our Milwaukee projection this year and I got to think, I think they're going to beat that projection.
All righty. Well then, without further ado, your 2025 PECOTA projections for the NL Central. We have our Chicago Cubs at 90 wins, 71 losses. Milwaukee at 80 and 81. St. Louis 78 and 83. Pittsburgh 71 and 86. And in the basement, you have the Cincinnati Reds. The Cubs, 90 wins. You heard it here first. Bet the kids college educate. No, don't do that. But Craig, tell me, what does PECOTA 90 wins? Craig Counsell brought it up earlier. We need to be a 90 win team, and boom, that's what the number that you guys hit on. What is it about the 2025 Chicago Cubs that PECOTA likes so much? 90 wins. That is incredible.
Well, I mean, if I can be, succinct about it, Kyle Tucker. It's not the only thing, of course, right? It's not one guy can't swing everything that much, but we're projecting over 5 wins for him in terms of 5.3 WARP is our projection for him. I think when you look at the Cubs the last few years, and the reason our projections look, you went back, obviously we underestimated the Brewers by quite a bit last year. The other ones are not too bad, no, right? On the whole, I think one of the things that we looked at with the Cubs heading into this season, as they've headed into the last few seasons, is there are a lot of really nice players. This is not a bad team, but you're missing the top end player. You're missing the guy who moves the needle, and Kyle Tucker is potentially the guy who moves the needle. This is an MVP caliber player. Obviously, he missed a significant portion of last season with what they originally called a shin contusion, but sounded more like a fracture. But when he played, even when, in the limited time he played, he was worth multiple wins on the season. And he just gives them a ceiling offensively that they didn't have prior. As much as I love Cody Bellinger, again, this is another guy who is more in the 2 to 3 win mold. You get a guy in the 5 win mold. It really changes the dynamics of the club, especially when all the guys surrounding him are 2 to 3, maybe 3.5 win players, right? There's a synergy there that his level of dynamic talent can raise the floor when the floor was already so solid in the first place. And I think that's exactly the type of move that they were missing, to begin with. And so I was pretty skeptical of the Cubs heading into last year. I liked our projection. I understood some people felt it was a little low, and I understood why, because there is a lot of talent on this team, but the talent tends to be of good, a really good, above average player. But Kyle Tucker is a star. And I think that's moving the needle in a significant way in this respect. And frankly, I think they've done an admirable job of filling in the cracks elsewhere, whether it's the bullpen. I know they didn't get Tanner Scott, but I think they've done a pretty good job of filling in those cracks in the bullpen. Obviously, getting a full season, another year out of Shota Imanaga, maybe a full season out of Justin Steele. The depth in the starting pitching is really nice. And one hidden factor here is we released our Cubs prospect list I think last week. Their top 5 prospects have 2025 ETAs. So that's not necessarily built into our depth charts. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but they have quality prospects ready to contribute this year, which again pushes that floor up and up and up. And when you get a star level talent, it raises that ceiling even higher.
Well, right now you have the Cubs with a 79.4 chance of winning the division and an 86.9% chance of making the playoffs. That is confident. The Cubs have not been in the playoffs since 2020. You feel that this is their year?
I mean, look, it's the projection system, right? I mean,
Craig, it's you.
It's crunching the numbers, right? So it's saying if they're at 90 wins and the rest of the division is weak, again, we can talk about whether Milwaukee is actually weak or not. Look, they lost Willy Adames. They're going to have to fill that hole. All of a sudden, sure, you can either slide Bryce Turang over to shortstop, you can slide Joey Ortiz over to shortstop, but then you have to backfill that spot too, and you have to get the production that they got out of those guys from the new guy on top of it, right? So there are ways that they're going to be backfilling. They have rotation spots they're going to be backfilling. And I think if you just look at the team here, like, again, I don't know if Matthew Boyd, I was surprised when he got the contract that he got, but he still fills an important need for the Cubs, even if he's going to miss some time, right? We're not counting on him, even in our projection, we're not counting on him to throw a full season's workload. We have him at 127 innings. Maybe that's optimistic, but even if it is optimistic, the number of guys that I talked about, whether it's at the minor league level in Cade Horton getting healthy and back on the mound at some point this year, whether it's Ben Brown coming out of the bullpen to pitch, and start some games, whether it's bumping Javier Assad further back and then he needs to take a step forward. And honestly, one addition by subtraction here is Kyle Hendricks. And I'm not trying to kick the guy on the way out, but he projected really poorly. And obviously he had a rough year, but he projected really poorly to begin with. And we knew that they were going to give him a lot of innings last year. And they did. And so taking a guy who is not performing and backfilling him with someone who, even if it's just average performance, that makes a big difference in a projection too.
So Shota Imanaga really, I mean, when I first heard about him and I had people on to talk about him, we knew he was going to be good. Just how good he was really, I think, a surprise to a lot of fans as far as, I think early on people were like, he might project a 2, maybe a 3, but he ends up being the Cubs' lone all-star last year. And just, every start, they called it showtime. It was absolutely amazing. What does PECOTA see for somebody like Shota Imanaga here in his second year with the Cubs?
Yeah, and I'd have to go back and look at our projection, but I want to put my hand up. I know our projection was a little more dour than some other places, and the reason for that, and I remember talking with you about it last year, was he had a very high home run rate in Japan. And obviously the power hitters here are more plentiful than they are in Japan. And the ball, it depends on the season, but the ball can fly a little bit more easily here than in Japan. And so our concern was, and certainly a concern of mine, was how is that going to translate to the majors? If he's got obviously his splitter was his main, was one of his main out pitches. And we've seen this with Yoshinobu Yamamoto as well. And we're probably going to see it with Roki Sasaki. It's a new ball. It comes out of the hand differently. They're not going to have the exact same feel for it immediately, stuff like that. Right. And so I'm looking at, how given his fastball, and I know it's an invisible, it's got the great ride, it gets swings and misses, but when guys hit it, they hit it really well. I was really concerned about the home run rate. Turned out he was, it wasn't like he was keeping it in the park all the time, but he did far more than enough. And the projection system now has recalibrated. Ours has looked at what he did in the majors, and we have him for an 84 DRA minus. That's 16% better than league average, over 163 innings. That's the best pitcher on the team. That's 3.5 WARP. That's a very strong projection. I know that might not sound like a lot in terms of wins and wins above replacement for people, but for our system, it tops out kind of 6-7 in terms of projected WARP. Juan Soto might be higher than that, guys of that level, but like 3.5 for a starting pitcher is really strong. Unless you're Logan Webb and you throw 200 innings, 3.5 is really, really strong. So it's giving him a lot of respect for the year that he had. And I think deservedly so. He was unbelievable.
Now, we have a question here from Break Even Tom that said, did he project when he looked at our schedule in March and April? It's hard ASF. So what Break Even Tom is talking about is how difficult. And I think that's where Cub fans, they look at the schedule. You have that series with the Dodgers in Japan. Then you got Arizona, and you saw their pitching staff. They added Corbin Burns. Athletics, okay, meh. But then you got the Padres, the Rangers, the Dodgers, the Padres, the Diamondbacks, the Dodgers. I mean, that month of April for the Cubs is absolutely brutal. And so I think that, people kind of look at that and they're like, how are they going to get past? Even when you go into May, I mean, you got the Brewers, the Giants, the Mets before the schedule kind of starts to even out. So I think for the Cub fan, you're taking a look at that month and say to yourself, okay, to me, if they can stay slightly above 500, if they could just get through that month of April through there, then I think the Cubs are going to be in good shape. But that's we've seen it the last 2 years where the Cubs at some point in time early on flop either in April or May, and then they're back 10 games, and that's hard to get back.
Yeah. I mean, look, I certainly get it. And I sympathize. I certainly understand. But the reality is, the projection systems look at the schedule. They know who everyone they match it. When we do a simulation of a season, it's the teams playing each other, right? So that is part of it. But also what that means is you're looking at a much softer second half of the season or anything beyond the first couple months, right? Softer 2/3 of the season if all of those games are up front and out of the way. And the other part is what I would say is, look, I understand not wanting to have confidence in your team because then the crash hurts more, right? And there's only one winner at the end of every season in terms of the World Series and all of that. But all those teams got to play you too. They have to play the Cubs. They should worry about that. They should worry about Shota Imanaga. They should worry about Justin Steele. They should worry about this lineup grinding pitchers down. I remember talking to you last year about our Cardinals projection and why it believed in the Cardinals, despite their really rough year and all this stuff. And I talked about their offense and just the ability of all these high-end performers to wear pitchers down. And it really did believe in their offense. I look at the Cubs offense at this point, and I understand the catcher spot is not necessarily or might be a concern, right? I liked the Carson Kelly addition. Again, that's a filling the crack kind of move. Carson Kelly's not going to move the needle in a ton of ways, but you look at their catcher performance last year and say, if we get Carson Kelly from last year compared to our catcher production, that's a big upgrade. Again, we'll see Matt Shaw. I really like Matt Shaw. We'll see what he does. All of these guys can hit. All of these guys can wear pitchers down. I know. Look, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Dansby Swanson signing back when it happened. I worried about his bat, all this kind of stuff. Doesn't matter. He's not nothing at the plate, right? He's not an automatic out. And then you get into the Kyle Tucker, Seiya Suzuki part of the lineup. This is going to wear pitchers down. They're going to wear these guys out. They're going to wear bullpens down, and they're going to be able to win series off of that ability to do that. You get Ian Happ in there working walks, taking pitches. Again, I mentioned the depth. Again, Moises Ballesteros can come up here and provide some offensive punch if some of these guys aren't working. There's a lot of depth here, a lot of depth that other teams don't have. And if you look at the success of the teams over the last few years, especially the Dodgers, they've done it with a really, really deep core of players, whether it's pitchers or batters, right, on either side of it. And the Cubs, they don't have, obviously I love Tucker, but like in general, they don't have the high end number of high end pieces that the Dodgers do. No one does. Fine. But they are looking at the depth of that roster offers. They're looking at more than just a 26-man roster. And I think that's going to really matter when you're looking at these really tough sections of the schedule. Maybe they're going to be able to get a guy, a day off and not lose much, right? They're going to be able to keep their guys fresh in those kinds of ways. They're going to be able to get that shot in the arm in the second half of the season. Or if it's not coming from internally, they can use those pieces, find someone in the second half that they need, fill the crack that's happened in season, and go from there.
Now, one of the things that I think when I look at this team, when I see the defense, and I think we get so excited about Kyle Tucker hit ball far that you forget that he is a Gold Glove defender. And so to me, Ian Happ with 3-time Gold Glover, you got Kyle Tucker who's won multiple Gold Gloves. PCA is probably as great a center fielder that the Cubs have had to start a season that I can even remember. I don't even, I'm trying to think of an equivalent of somebody with that ability in center field. And then you go around the diamond. I thought Michael Busch improved greatly and throughout the season. Obviously, we know that Nico has won a Gold Glove. Dansby, we all know Dansby. Matt Shaw is a question mark. But if you look around there, in general, the defense also just looks really phenomenal. So you're looking at a pitching staff, like you mentioned, bullpen that is much deeper. You're looking at with the offense, the addition of Tucker into that offense. Then all of a sudden, now when I think about it, 90 wins doesn't seem out of the realm.
Yeah, and again, I think some of this is gonna depend on what the rest of the division ends up shaking out to be. We have our projection, right? I think Milwaukee maybe is a little bit better than we're giving them credit for, but we're gonna see a lot. They play in the division a lot, and again, to the question asking about their schedule, they play in the Central. And look, historically, at least recently, the Centrals, both of them, have been softer in general than the coast, so the East and West divisions. Obviously, there are different years where the AL West, for example, this year looks quite soft as well. But that being said, so they get to play most of their games in the Central. They can potentially beat up on some of these other clubs. Again, I could understand if you're a Reds fan or if you're worried about the Reds. They have a number of young players that can take steps forward, things like that. I think the Pirates, you should be able to win your games against the Pirates for the most part. Not that they don't have anyone, but the Cubs have put themselves in a position where I think they should be expected to beat those kinds of teams on a relatively consistent basis. And look, I understand expectations are hard. I really do identify with not wanting to believe too much because it hurts on the other side if it doesn't work out. But like this is a good team. And I think we need to recognize that. And look, I understand. I take issue with some of the things Tom Ricketts has said about, being his ability to invest in the team, things like that. But even Ryan Presley, right? Ryan Presley is on the downside of things in terms of both his age, some of his numbers, his production. Okay, that lets you use Porter Hodge in other situations. That moves guys back down the depth chart a little bit and gives Craig Counsell some flexibility in how he wants to use the guys who may be his actual best relievers. That's a move that I'm not going to say it's like overly savvy. Sure, I think there could be, and I don't want people to get mad at me here, a little bit of like the Craig Kimbrell thing in here. And look, I'm a Dodgers fan. I experienced the Craig Kimbrell thing too. So I understand what I'm saying when I say that. But they can move him out of the space. Not quite that, but the experience. He's not as wild as that, but he is going to throw a lot of sliders, and it's just going to be whether guys swing at them, right? There's a lot of sliders, a lot of curveballs that he throws just below the zone. Are the guys going to swing at it, or are they going to get the fastball that they can hit? And there might be some nerve-wracking outings in there. But the bigger thing is when the time comes to flip the switch, if he's not performing, Craig Counsell can either knock him down the pecking order or throw him out and not put him on a playoff roster or use him in crucial leverage situations down the stretch. But in the meantime, they can get close games to the ninth inning and give their offense chances to stretch those leads and make that less crucial. He can opt to go with Hodge. He can opt to go with Nate Pearson if Nate Pearson looks, the way that they want him to look after the pickoff last year. They can use some of these other guys. Maybe Ben Brown, again, if he's not in the rotation, maybe he explodes as a bullpen arm. Those options all exist, and they give Counsell and the front office a lot of flexibility, while giving the rest of the guys a little bit of a security blanket at the back end to start the season. And I know those guys have flamed out the last few years for the Cubs. Everyone was worried, there was a certain amount of pressure on Adbert Alzolay heading into last year, and that flamed out. And you're talking about those early games, putting them in a deficit, and he blew them bad, right? But again, I think it really is about the depth in all of this. And it's not the sexiest moves. And I would argue they should have made some sexier moves here, right? I would have loved for them to get Max Fried instead of Matt Boyd, right? I think having no shade to Shota, but like having either another or a true number one at the front of this rotation would have pushed that ceiling higher and higher than 90 wins, right? In terms of projection. That being said, I don't think that means what they've done is worthless, because I think they've done a good job on the other side of things in terms of filling in those cracks and making some of those incremental improvements.
Well, Craig, I got to tell you, when I first saw the 90 wins, I had to take a double take. Now I'm starting to feel a little bit of confidence right before pitchers and catchers report. Craig, I appreciate you jumping on. I know it's a busy time for you with the projections coming out. Tell our listeners where they can read more of your work and find out more about PECOTA, and where they can follow you on the socials.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me again this year. I always appreciate it. Thank you to people for tuning in. Baseballprospectus.com. It's in my handle that down there that you see at the bottom of the screen. It's where you'll find everything that we do. We do PECOTA week. That's what the start of our standings projections is. We'll be digging into interesting players, interesting teams, free agents still out there that teams could sign, things like that all throughout the week. It's the whole week is dedicated to PECOTA. We'll be wrapping up our prospect list. I mentioned that we have our Cubs list already out. And as I talked about before, we've got the Baseball Prospectus Annual. If you're not a subscriber to Baseball Prospectus, I think you should be. $46 for the full year. You get access to essentially everything on the site: projections, prospect write-ups, which we do throughout the whole year. We have different tools. We have fantasy tools, all sorts of stuff like that. If you're not, though, and you still want some of the stuff, we got the book right here. Paul Skeen's on the cover. I know it's an in-division rival here, but number 30, it's our 30th edition of this book, which is really cool. A big number for us. And it's got projections for every, over 1,900 players in the books. It's got our top 101 with write-ups. It's jam-packed full of essays for every team, write-ups on players for every team. So you can go get that if you don't want to subscribe to the site, if you like a physical copy of something. And on social, I'm on Blue Sky for the most part at this point. You got the handle right down there.
Craig, appreciate it as always. And like I said, you are so welcome this year. Every time you have the Cubs winning 90 games, you're completely welcome. Either way, you're welcome. We love having you and getting this idea of what's going on. It gives us a little bit more of an understanding of how the system works, and appreciate your insight.
I appreciate you having me. Like I said, I like walking in here without having to put on the armor. I walk in with confidence, and I say to Cubs fans, walk into the season with some confidence. Don't worry about the early schedule. They got to play you guys too.
You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast, episode 9, season number 4. The 2025 Cubs PECOTA projections are out. In this segment, we are rounding the bases, but don't forget, leave us one of those 5-star reviews. Crawly, all right, it's time to get the latest Cubs info and news from around Major League Baseball.
Yep, last time we recorded, the hot stove news was breaking. Max Scherzer signed with the Blue Jays 1 year at $15.5 million. The big free agent signing, though, Dustin, over the weekend was Jack Flaherty on a pretty friendly 2-year, $35 million that includes an opt-out after this season. So Flaherty pitched for the Tigers last year, was traded for the Dodgers, and now he's back. And so the deal will pay Flaherty $25 million this year and include a $10 million player option for 2026. That would increase to $20 million if he makes at least 15 starts in that season. So Flaherty was ranked number 10 in the Athletics top 40 free agent list, right? With that signing, there are only 6 free agents left on the Athletics top 40 board. Number 7, we talked about in 7-1, Alex Bregman. Number 8, we talked about plenty, Pete Alonso.
Yeah.
But then, Dustin, it drops all the way to 31 for starting pitchers Nick Pivetta, number 33, Andrew Heaney, and number 37, Jose Quintana. Number 38, Alex Verdugo is left. So, boy, there's a lot of drop-off. There's not a lot of free agents left.
No, sure aren't. Not a whole lot to pick from, no.
Nope. And on Friday, another free agent's gone. The Mets signed former Cub Nicky Two-Strike Magical to a 1-year deal. It's a split contract, so it's worth different amounts on whether he's in the majors or the minors. And so, the Cubs get rid of one Nick and get a different one, right?
Yeah,
so
that's interesting too.
Southsider, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also on Friday, the Padres announced they finalized a deal for next year with starting pitcher Michael King. And Bruce talked about this when we were in segment 1 about the finances of the Padres being a mess. There's a lawsuit with ownership. It's nuts. But they did come to a deal with Michael King for 1 year, okay? And it contains a mutual option for 26. So King's contract will guarantee him $7.75 million, but is structured to benefit both parties. King will receive $1 million salary with a $3 million signing bonus. The 2026 mutual option is worth $15 million and includes a $3.75 million buyout, which could become $4 million if King hits incentives based on number of games started. Dustin, between this and all the Dodgers nonsense, you need a degree from Yale in
I was gonna say I need an accounting. We need an accounting guest now. Next, that's our next week's guest is an accounting guest to try to spell this out for us. That's
it's basically
pretty silly. Yeah,
he's basically not really going to count much against the cap against the luxury tax for this year. And so this is what teams are starting, between this and the deferred money, it's getting a little bit nuts.
Crazy.
Now, if you are like me and jonesing for baseball, then the 2025 Caribbean Series is for you. If you don't care about the big game, well, actually, this ends before the big game on Sunday, but it is the 67th edition of the Caribbean Series. It features teams from the Dominican Republic, Japan, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Venezuela. It started, Dustin, last Friday. It's an international tournament consisting of 14 games across 8 days in El Nido de las Águilas in Mexicali, Mexico. So this Caribbean Series started in 1949, and a lot of Hall of Famers and MLB All-Stars have competed in it over the years. Rod Carew, Miguel Cabrera, Roberto Clemente, Edgar Martinez, David Ortiz, Pudge Rodriguez, Ivan Rodriguez. And so the 4 mainstays, the permanent members are of the Caribbean Confederation of Professional Baseball, Venezuela, Puerto Rico, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic are always represented. And then there's other teams that come in like Colombia, Panama, etc. But for the first time this year, Japan is participating, right? And so the way that this works is through the winter clubs, the team that wins then gets into this tournament. Now, Japan has sent over a team called Japan Breeze, composed of their multiple leagues and levels. Now, it's interesting. Besides Japan being in the tournament for the first time, there are a couple Cubs connections in this Caribbean tournament. First off, former Cubs nemesis Albert Pujols is the manager of Los Leones de Escogido from the Dominican Republic. So Albert Pujols, maybe we see him one day in major leagues managing?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. That would be fun, right?
Former Cub catcher and quality assurance coach of the 2016 World Series champion Cubs, Henry Blanco, a.k.a. Hank White, is the manager for Los Cardenales de Lara for Venezuela.
I love how you roll your R's, Crawly. Love how you roll those R's.
There you go. And speaking of the 2016 Cubs, backup infielder Munerio Kawasagi is playing for the Japanese Breeze. You remember him, Cub fans?
I don't remember him. I do not remember him.
Okay, so you remember spring training 2016. Dexter Fowler comes back. Everyone's all
remember
excited.
That. Yep.
They had the karaoke thing, and he was singing karaoke. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Don't Want to Miss a Thing by Aerosmith. It was hilarious. But he always kind of had he's very expressive. He was well-loved in the clubhouse. He didn't play much. I remember him playing after the Cubs clinched They clinched by the Cardinals losing to San Francisco, but the next day, like none of the starters were in the lineup. So Kawasaki was in the lineup, but he was on the 2016 team, and he did get a ring. And so I wonder if there's any autograph collectors, because he's hard to get, obviously being in Japan. He doesn't do signings. So I wonder if anybody went down to Mexico to see if they could get a couple balls signed or something.
Interesting.
But if you're interested, it is being broadcast in English on MLB Network, MLB TV, and MLB Network Direct. And so when this episode drops tomorrow, you can catch Puerto Rico versus the DR, the Dominican, at 4 p.m. Central Time, and Japan versus Venezuela at 9 p.m. Central Time. The semifinals take place on Wednesday, the battle for third place on Thursday, and the finals on Friday. So, Dustin, you know, like I said, it's just some fun baseball. It's a great tournament. And I can just tell you that Latin American baseball is just different than American. It's just, you're allowed to pimp home runs. You're allowed to bat flip. It's encouraged. Fans go nuts. They have cheering sections, bands. It's a totally different vibe, man. So if you are interested in baseball, again, MLB Network will have these games on, and they're going to be a lot of fun. And again, it's growing the game internationally. And this Caribbean series has a long storied history. So I recommend any baseball fans to check it out.
All right. Be sure to check that out. Also saw over the weekend that Fay Vincent passed away, most notably remembered for banning Pete Rose.
Yeah, well, it was Bart Giamatti that banned him, but yeah,
well, he
Fay
carried
Vincent
it out.
doing,
I mean, most people believe that it was Fay Vincent because most people don't remember Bart Giamatti.
Right. So he was the 8th commissioner of Major League Baseball. And here's the thing, after the Pete Rose thing, because Fay Vincent did a lot of the legwork, you know what I mean? Bart Giamatti was the head, but Vincent did a lot of the work. And then Giamatti died only 8 days after the Pete Rose decision was released. And so less than a month after becoming the commissioner, Vincent had to lead MLB as an earthquake before Game 3 of the World Series. They had to put a stop. That was between San Francisco and Oakland.
The shake at the stick, right?
Yeah, the shake at the stick. I remember it clearly getting ready to watch Game 3, and I'm watching the pregame, and all of a sudden it goes to like Roseanne is what I remember. I don't know if any of our listeners remember, but I remember it cut away to Roseanne, and I'm like, what the heck happened to the game? I'm freaking out. There's no internet. There's no Twitter.
Right.
I got no game. I got Roseanne. And then later on, that's when they come back on and they said they had a major earthquake. So they delayed that 10 games. Vincent also saw, or 10 days. Vincent also saw the expansion of the Rockies and Marlins as they were added to MLB. But most Cub fans did not like Fay Vincent for his realignment plan in 1992. So in 1992, Vincent relied on something that's in the for the commissioner to be able to kind of make decisions on the best interest of the game authority, right? So it's in the documents. And so he orders the Cubs and the Cardinals, who were in the NL East division, to swap places with the Atlanta Braves and the Cincinnati Reds, who were in the NL West division, right? And if you look at it back then, it made sense geographically, right? Atlanta is on the East Coast, Cincinnati's farther east than St. Louis, but it was unpopular with the owners, the Cubs. And so the Cubs sued Vincent in an Illinois federal district court, demanding an injunction to block the commissioner.
I don't remember any of this.
Oh, yeah. And so this was like a big deal at the time. And so Vincent, if his plan would have gone through for realignment, the NL East would have been the Pirates, Expos, Mets, Phillies, Braves, and Reds were the two teams that would have switched over. The NL West would have had the Padres, Astros, Dodgers, Giants, Cardinals, and Cubs, which would have been especially a disaster for the Cardinals and the Cubs because, you know, how many of those games would have been played on the West Coast?
Right.
You know, and the Cubs, you know, they didn't have that many night games at the time. It would have been a mess. And so thankfully that never went through, but that move angered a lot of owners actually. And he was basically kicked out by the owners. He was pushed out.
Yeah. Huh. That's interesting. I did not remember that part of it. Again, I always remember him as the guy with the Pete Rose thing. And then when I worked in national radio, he was very accessible. He did like to talk. He would go on record. He was very responsive to media requests. So that was pretty cool. All right. So Cubs spring training swag, Crawly. More swag for Crawly, huh?
Well, not for me this year. The new spring training hat collection of all 30 MLB teams dropped today on Monday when we're recording that. And Dustin, I always like this just because in general it's pretty cool because you can get a little bit funky during spring training, right?
Yep.
So when you take a look at this,
different color patterns, that's right.
Yeah,
not always the traditional stuff.
Yeah, it kind of just changes things up, and some of them, look really cool. I think the Marlins kind of has a nice retro. The Dodgers has a nice retro look, so you can kind of play around with this. The A's have the yellow color on their hat with a green A on it. So I always tend to like these. As far as the Cubs, though, this is similar to the design that they had last year. It's the teal blue hat with the walking bear logo with the Cubby blue on the bill. The only thing that they changed this year is the patch. And so I already have this from last year, so I don't need to get it.
You already have that one. Okay.
It's similar. The only difference is the patch. The general
They got you once. They're not going to get you twice.
They aren't.
Can you get the patch?
I don't need the patch. I'm good with the patch I got.
Speaking of getting stuff, Crawly, what did Crawly get this weekend when he saw Sammy Sosa?
Yeah, Sammy Sosa was out at Old Republic, and the place was packed. Justin Roman killed the Q&A again. He did it at Club 400. He did it for Top Shelf Cards, which they were so great to us out there. So we got to see Sammy. I got to see Sammy a little bit early before the signing. We met overall at Top Shelf Cards. And, I see Sammy, and he just gives me this big hug. And if you would have told, 15, 16-year-old Crawly that Sammy Sosa would actually know me, it would have blown my mind. So
yeah, check it out. Be sure to check out. Give your social media cool pictures, Crawly.
Yeah, I saw Crawly's Cubs. Yeah, it was crazy. But the things that I got signed, I got this picture of Sammy and I from Club 400. So in my man cave, I have a area that I'm building up called the Wall of Crawl. It's me with all the players I've met over the years autographed. And
Very
so
cool.
Everybody from Billy Williams to Justin Steele I have on there. And so, I kind of got the idea at Club 400.
Wall of Crawl, huh?
Yes. At Club 400 one time, they gave out autograph. They took our pictures and they gave all the pictures to Kyle Schwarber. And we got them all signed. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do with this? And that's where I thought of Portillo's. You know how if you go to Portillo's, they have all the pictures of Dick Portillo with all the famous people? And so I said, I got to do Wall of Crawl. The other thing, and I'll get our listeners if they're interested, I got this piece. I found it on Etsy. I'm kind of like a Cubs hoarder. I look for everything Cubs everywhere, anywhere. And this is a caricature of Sammy doing the Sammy Hop brick wall WGN on there.
That's cool.
And I got this signed by Sammy Sosa. It says Sammy Sosa, 609 home runs. So
nice.
It was, I will say this, you can have your opinion on Sammy all you want, whether he should be welcome back, whether he shouldn't, what he did, what he didn't, how he used to behave, whatever. All I can tell the listeners out there is what I've experienced personally. And I've been at hundreds of signings in my lifetime, Dustin. And a lot of times these guys sit there, they look at the clock, and when it's time to go, they're out. It's done.
Pack up their things and put the caps on the Sharpies, and out the door they go, right?
I've been to signings where the players don't even look up. They basically just sit there and they sign, give it to you, sign the next one. Don't. I can say Sammy goes above and beyond, is so kind to everybody. I don't know anybody right now that, again, I've been to Chicago Sports Spectacular. I've been to Club 400. I went with Top Shelf Cards at Old Republic Kitchen. I was at Cubs Convention. I haven't met anyone that hasn't enjoyed the experience of getting something signed by Sammy. And a lot of times, Dustin, you're supposed to pay for pictures, and Sammy will be like, oh, you want to take a selfie? It's like, no, Sammy, you're not supposed to. He'll take selfies with people. He's just so awesome with the fans.
He gets it. He's an entertainer.
And I think he's just glad to be back after all these years. And I was glad to.
I'm glad to have him back. Listen, everybody's entitled to their opinions. No doubt about that. I'm happy he's back. I'm happy you got out there. The norovirus kind of ripped through my house over the weekend, so was not able to join you. Didn't want to get you or anybody else sick out there, so I kept my distance. But I'm glad you had a good time. All right, Crawly, that is a wrap. Episode 9, season 4 is in the books. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. Follow on all the socials. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. Email us. flythew670gmail.com, and you can watch us by subscribing to the 670 The Score YouTube channel. All right, Crawly, have a good week. It is Super Bowl week, so I'm a little extra busy, but we will be back again before the Cubs are due out in spring training on Sunday, right? The 9th?
Absolutely. And
Pitchers and catchers.
Pitchers and catchers around the corner. Caribbean Series baseball. We're almost there, Dustin. Go Cubs! Hey guys, it's Crawly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Go Cubs!